Money can buy luxury, it can buy power, but it can never buy respect. In a hall filled with billionaires and ministers, one man believed he was untouchable, until a simple waitress proved that truth can be more valuable than any fortune. Stories like this remind us of what truly matters in life. While you watch, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss more powerful stories like this. The crystal chandeliers of the Grosvenor House Hotel cast prismatic light across London's most exclusive business conference. Khalil Al-Rashid adjusted his platinum cufflinks as he surveyed the room filled with global CEOs, government ministers, and financial titans. At 42, he commanded a business empire worth $8 billion, and everyone in this room knew it. His perfectly tailored Savile Row suit, handcrafted Italian shoes, and the subtle gleam of his diamond-encrusted Patek Philippe watch announced his status before he even spoke. Yet beneath the polished exterior, Khalil carried the weight of expectations that had shaped him since childhood, the pressure to maintain his family's honor, to never show weakness, to always be superior. The morning session on global economic resilience had been predictably boring. Ministers spouting the same recycled policies, CEOs repeating market platitudes. Khalil's attention wandered to his phone, where his assistant had sent the quarterly reports. Al-Rashid Industries had just acquired another tech startup in Silicon Valley, adding another $100 million to their portfolio. Success had become routine, almost mundane. He craved something more challenging, more stimulating than these corporate theatrics. During the coffee break, Khalil positioned himself near the networking area where deals worth billions were casually discussed over espresso and petits fours. His reputation preceded him, the Lion of Dubai, they called him in business journals. Young entrepreneurs approached with trembling hands and rehearsed pitches, hoping for even a moment of his attention. He enjoyed the power, the way conversations stopped when he entered a room, the deference in people's voices when they addressed him. This was his world, his domain, where his word could make or break careers, where his approval could launch companies or destroy them with equal ease. A young woman in a simple black uniform approached his table, carrying a silver tray with fresh coffee service. She moved with quiet efficiency, her dark hair pulled back in a modest ponytail, her eyes focused downward in what Khalil assumed was the appropriate deference of service staff. She appeared to be Middle Eastern, probably Lebanese or Syrian, he thought dismissively. Just another immigrant working in London's service industry, grateful for any employment she could find. Her presence barely registered in his consciousness beyond her function to refill his cup and disappear back into invisibility. "More coffee, sir?" she asked in accented English, her voice soft and respectful. Khalil didn't look up from his phone, where he was reviewing stock prices. He waved dismissively at his cup, while continuing his conversation with Heinrich Müller, the German automotive magnate beside him. "These people," he said in Arabic to Heinrich, who spoke the language fluently from his years doing business in the Gulf, "they come to our countries, learn nothing, contribute nothing, then scatter across Europe like leaves in the wind. Look at her. Probably can't even read the financial newspapers she's serving coffee over." He gestured carelessly toward the waitress, his tone dripping with condescension. "I bet she thinks the London Stock Exchange is some kind of shopping center. These service workers, they have no understanding of the real world, of what it takes to build something meaningful. They exist on the periphery of greatness, never comprehending the conversations happening around them." The young woman's hand stilled on the coffee pot. Khalil continued, emboldened by what he perceived as Heinrich's amused attention. "In my country, we have a saying, the dog barks, but the caravan moves on. These people are just background noise to the real business of the world. They pour coffee, we build empires." What happened next would haunt Khalil's dreams for months to come. The young woman straightened slowly, setting down the coffee pot with deliberate precision. When she spoke, her voice carried the crisp, cultured accent of someone educated at Cambridge or Oxford, each word pronounced with devastating clarity. "Mr. Al-Rashid," she said, her eyes meeting his directly for the first time, "I couldn't help but notice your commentary on the peripheral nature of service workers. However, I feel compelled to point out that your recent acquisition of Technova Solutions was considerably overpriced at $400 million. The company's debt-to-equity ratio of 2.3 suggests significant financial instability, particularly given the volatile nature of their primary market in Southeast Asia." The conference room seemed to stop breathing. Khalil's mouth fell open as she continued with surgical precision. "Furthermore, Your diversification strategy into renewable energy, while admirable from an environmental standpoint, appears to be poorly timed given the current regulatory uncertainties in the European Union. I would suggest focusing on your core petroleum infrastructure, while gradually building sustainable partnerships, rather than aggressive acquisition. Heinrich Meller's eyebrows had climbed toward his hairline. Other nearby conversations had halted as people turned to witness this unprecedented moment. A waitress was delivering a business analysis that would have impressed Harvard MBA graduates, and she was doing it with the calm confidence of someone who clearly understood every nuance of what she was discussing. Your expansion into African markets shows promise, she continued, seemingly oblivious to the gathering crowd. But you're entering territories where your family name carries unfortunate historical baggage. The Hassan Group's collapse in 2008 left many investors skeptical of Al-Rashid reliability in sub-Saharan partnerships. At the mention of the Hassan Group, Khalil's blood turned to ice. Very few people knew about that particular business dealing, and even fewer understood its implications. This young woman had just referenced something that should have been buried in confidential legal documents and family archives. "Who are you?" Khalil whispered, his arrogance crumbling like sand castles before an incoming tide. The young woman smiled, and for the first time, Khalil noticed the intelligence burning in her dark eyes, the quiet strength in her posture. "My name is Amira Hassan," she said clearly, ensuring everyone within earshot could hear. "I'm a doctoral candidate in international economics at Oxford University, and I believe you knew my father." The coffee cup slipped from Khalil's nerveless fingers, shattering against the marble floor, with a sound that seemed to echo through the suddenly silent room. Around them, camera phones began to appear as conference attendees realized they were witnessing something extraordinary: the public humiliation of one of the world's most powerful men by someone he had dismissed as invisible. Amira Hassan picked up her serving tray with practiced ease, her expression remaining professionally neutral, despite the earthquake she had just triggered. "I hope you enjoy the remainder of the conference, Mr. Al-Rashid," she said politely. "And perhaps next time you might consider that the people you dismiss so readily often know more than you assume." As she walked away, Khalil remained frozen in his chair, acutely aware of the dozens of eyes watching his reaction, the whispered conversations beginning to spread through the room like wildfire. His carefully constructed image of superiority had been demolished in less than 3 minutes by a woman he had treated as invisible. Heinrich Müller leaned over, his voice barely above a whisper. "My friend," he said in Arabic, "I believe you have just encountered a very dangerous young woman." Khalil could only nod, his mind racing with questions that demanded answers. Who was Amira Hassan? What did she know about his family's business dealings? And most importantly, what did she want? The conference suddenly seemed less important than finding answers to questions that could potentially destroy everything he had built. The networking session continued around him, but Khalil Al-Rashid sat in his expensive suit, surrounded by luxury, feeling more vulnerable than he had since childhood. For the first time in decades, he had encountered someone who could see through his armor of wealth and status to the man beneath, and she was not impressed by what she found. Khalil spent the next session staring blindly at PowerPoint presentations about emerging markets, his mind replaying those devastating 3 minutes. Every word Amira Hassan had spoken revealed intimate knowledge of his business operations, knowledge that should have been impossible for an outsider to possess. The Hassan Group collapse of 2008 was particularly troubling. That deal had been handled personally by his father and uncle, with documentation sealed under multiple confidentiality agreements. How could a graduate student have access to such sensitive information? During the lunch break, Khalil cornered Heinrich Müller in the hotel's private dining room. "Heinrich, what do you know about the Hassan Group?" he asked without preamble, his usual diplomatic approach abandoned in favor of urgent necessity. Heinrich's expression grew cautious. Omar Hassan was a brilliant petroleum engineer, built an impressive operation in Nigeria and Chad. Then everything fell apart very quickly. He paused, studying Khalil's face. "Your father was involved in the acquisition of Hassan's assets, if I recall correctly." "What aren't you telling me?" Khalil pressed. Heinrich sighed deeply. "There were rumors, Khalil. Rumors that the Hassan Group's financial difficulties were not entirely natural. Some whispered about sabotage, about deliberate market manipulation. Omar Hassan claimed he was betrayed by someone he trusted, but he died before he could prove anything. Khalil felt ice forming in his stomach. He died? Heart attack, supposedly brought on by stress. His wife and daughter disappeared shortly after. No one knew what happened to them. Heinrich's eyes narrowed. Until today, it seems. That afternoon, Khalil could not concentrate on the conference proceedings. Every few minutes, he found himself scanning the room for Amira Hassan, but she seemed to have vanished as mysteriously as she had appeared. He tried to approach other catering staff, but none of them knew anything about a doctoral student working as a waitress. It was as if she had materialized specifically to deliver her devastating message and then evaporated. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from business associates who had witnessed the morning's encounter. The story was already spreading through London's financial circles. "Saw the video on LinkedIn," read one text. "Who is this Hassan girl?" Another simply said, "We need to talk." The most disturbing message came from his uncle Rashad in Dubai. "Handle this situation immediately. The family's reputation is at stake." That evening, Khalil returned to his suite at the Ritz-Carlton. His usual confidence shattered. Room service delivered dinner, but he found himself studying the server's face, wondering what secrets might hide behind seemingly humble appearances. The world suddenly felt less predictable, less controlled. For 42 years, his wealth and status had insulated him from uncertainty. Now, a young woman with perfect English and devastating knowledge had stripped away that protection in minutes. He opened his laptop and began researching everything he could find about the Hassan Group. The official records painted a picture of financial mismanagement and market volatility, but as Khalil dug deeper, patterns began to emerge. Timing of certain transactions seemed suspiciously coincidental. Key contracts had been lost just when the company needed them most. Investors had withdrawn support simultaneously, despite previously strong relationships. Around midnight, his investigation uncovered something that made his blood run cold. A sealed court document from 2009, marked confidential, contained testimony from Omar Hassan, claiming that his business partner had deliberately orchestrated his company's destruction. The partner's name was redacted, but the timeline matched perfectly with his father's acquisition of Hassan Group assets. Khalil closed the laptop, nausea churning in his stomach. If Omar Hassan's accusations were true, then Al-Rashid Industries had been built partially on theft and betrayal. The fortune that had defined his entire identity might be founded on another family's destruction. His phone rang, displaying his uncle Rashad's number. Khalil hesitated before answering. "Khalil," Rashad's voice was sharp with anger. "What happened at the conference today is unacceptable. I've been receiving calls from partners across 3 continents. You allowed some servant girl to humiliate you publicly. Uncle, she knew things about the Hassan Group that the Hassan matter was resolved years ago." Rashad interrupted firmly. "Omar Hassan was a poor businessman who made bad decisions. His failure is not our responsibility. But uncle, what if nothing? You will find this girl and ensure her silence. Use whatever means necessary. Our family's honor is not subject to attack by the children of failures." The line went dead, leaving Khalil staring at his phone in the darkness. His uncle's tone had carried an edge he had never heard before. Not just anger, but fear. Rashad was afraid of something, and that fear was more terrifying than any threat. Khalil walked to his window, looking out over London's glittering skyline. Somewhere in this vast city, Amira Hassan was probably sleeping, unaware that she had triggered forces that would soon focus their considerable power on destroying her. Unless, Khalil realized with growing dread, she was very aware indeed. Perhaps this encounter had not been chance. Perhaps Amira Hassan had been hunting him just as deliberately as he was now preparing to hunt her. The thought should have angered him. Instead, for reasons he could not explain, it filled him with something that felt almost like admiration. In a world where everyone bowed to his wealth and power, someone was finally fighting back. The question was, what would it cost them both? Outside his window, London slept peacefully, unaware that a war had just begun between 2 families whose history was written in blood and betrayal. A war that would either destroy everything Khalil Al-Rashid had ever believed about himself, or forge him into the man his father had always hoped he could become. The next morning brought unexpected developments. Khalil's head of security, Marcus Thompson, called at 6 a.m. with disturbing news. "Sir, we've located the catering company that provided staff for yesterday's conference. They have no record of employing anyone named Amira Hassan. According to their manager, their entire waitressing staff was accounted for. This woman somehow inserted herself into the event." Khalil sat up in bed, fully alert, despite having slept poorly. "What do you mean?" Inserted herself. "Professional infiltration, sir." She had authentic-looking credentials, knew the catering protocols, even wore the correct uniform. Someone trained her well. Marcus paused meaningfully. "This wasn't a chance encounter. She specifically targeted you." The implications hit Khalil like cold water. Amira Hassan had deliberately planned their confrontation, orchestrating every detail to maximum effect. The public humiliation, the witnesses, the precise timing, it had all been calculated. But why? What did she hope to gain by making such a dramatic enemy? An hour later, Khalil sat in his temporary London office, trying to maintain focus on legitimate business, while his mind churned with questions. His assistant brought morning newspapers, and his blood pressure spiked when he saw the headlines. "Billionaire humbled by brilliant waitress," led the Financial Times. The Guardian ran with, "When privilege meets education, a lesson in assumptions." Worst of all, the Daily Mail had somehow obtained video footage with the headline, "Arab Tycoon's Public Meltdown Goes Viral." His phone rang constantly, board members demanding explanations, business partners expressing concern, his uncle Rashad calling every hour with increasingly angry demands for action. The carefully cultivated image Khalil had spent decades building was crumbling in real time, and social media was accelerating the destruction exponentially. "Mr. Al-Rashid?" His assistant's voice came through the intercom. "There's a young woman here to see you. She says her name is Amira Hassan." Khalil's heart stopped. She had come to him. "Send her in," he managed, his voice surprisingly steady. Amira Hassan entered wearing a simple but elegant navy dress that suggested quality without ostentation. Her dark hair fell loose around her shoulders, and she carried herself with quiet confidence that seemed to fill the room. In daylight, away from the chaos of yesterday's encounter, Khalil could see that she was strikingly beautiful, not in the artificial way of socialites he usually encountered, but with a natural intelligence that made her features luminous. "Mr. Al-Rashid," she said, taking the seat across from his desk without being invited, "I thought we should continue our conversation privately." "You orchestrated yesterday's encounter," Khalil said, abandoning any pretense of pleasantries. "You deliberately infiltrated the conference to humiliate me publicly." "Why?" Amira smiled, and Khalil noticed how it transformed her entire face. "Because, Mr. Al-Rashid, private conversations can be denied. Public humiliation cannot be ignored." She crossed her legs gracefully. "And because you needed to understand what it feels like to be dismissed and underestimated." "What do you want?" Khalil asked bluntly. "Justice," she replied simply. "My father built an honest company that employed thousands of people across Africa. Your family destroyed him systematically, stole his life's work, and drove him to an early grave. I want acknowledgement of what was done, and I want it made right." Khalil leaned back in his chair, studying her face. "Those are serious accusations. Do you have proof?" Amira reached into her purse and withdrew a flash drive, placing it on his desk. Financial records, email communications, recorded phone conversations, witness testimonies. 8 years of investigation, Mr. Al-Rashid. Your uncle Rashad was very thorough in his betrayal, but not quite as clever as he thought. The flash drive sat between them like a loaded weapon. Khalil knew that picking it up would change everything, would force him to confront truths he had spent his entire life avoiding. But leaving it untouched would mean living with questions that would eventually destroy him anyway. "My father trusted Rashad Al-Rashid as his closest business partner," Amira continued, her voice steady, but carrying undercurrents of pain. "They built their first oil platform together in Chad. Your uncle was best man at my parents' wedding. I called him Uncle Rashad until I was 12 years old." "What changed when you were 12? Khalil asked, though he dreaded the answer. "That's when my father discovered the first discrepancies in their joint accounts. When he found emails between your uncle and Hassan Group competitors, offering insider information in exchange for market advantages. When he realized that every business setback he'd suffered for 2 years had been orchestrated by the man he trusted most." Amira's composure cracked slightly, revealing the anger beneath. "Do you know what it's like to watch your father cry, Mr. Al-Rashid? To see a man who built bridges across continents reduced to begging for mercy from someone he'd helped make wealthy? My father spent his final months not fighting his illness, but fighting to understand how someone he loved could betray him so completely." Khalil felt something twist in his chest. Guilt, recognition, horror. Where were you after he died? Running, she said simply. My mother was terrified that your uncle would target us next. We changed our names, moved constantly, lived on what little money my father had hidden in accounts Rashad couldn't access. I grew up in refugee communities across Europe, brilliant child of a dead businessman, watching my mother work menial jobs to keep us alive. The room fell silent. Khalil stared at the flash drive, understanding that his next decision would define not just his future, but his soul. Why come to me? Why not go directly to the authorities with this evidence? Amira leaned forward slightly. Because you're Omar Hassan's business partner's son. Because your fortune is built on my father's stolen legacy. Because you have the power to make this right in ways that courts and prosecutors never could. She paused. And because I believe, despite yesterday's evidence to the contrary, that you might actually have a conscience. What exactly are you asking me to do? Acknowledge the truth publicly, restore my family's name, return what was stolen, with interest. Her eyes never left his face. And help me expose your uncle for what he really is. Khalil's phone buzzed with another call from Rashad. He let it go to voicemail. If I refuse, then I release everything to the international press tomorrow morning. WikiLeaks has already expressed interest. The BBC is preparing a documentary. Your business empire will survive, but your reputation won't. She stood gracefully. I'll give you 24 hours to decide, Mr. Al-Rashid. Choose carefully. This is the only opportunity you'll have to control how this story ends. As she reached the door, Khalil called out, Amira. She turned. Yesterday you said you believed I knew your father, but I've never heard of Omar Hassan before this week. Her smile was sad and knowing. Oh, but you have, Mr. Al-Rashid. You just never knew his name. She paused dramatically. He built the oil platform where you took your first business meeting with your father. He designed the extraction systems that made your family's fortune possible. Omar Hassan's fingerprints are all over your success story. You just never bothered to learn who he was. The door closed behind her with finality, leaving Khalil alone with the flash drive and the growing realization that his entire life might be based on a lie. Outside, London continued its relentless pace, but inside his office, time seemed suspended. In 24 hours, he would have to choose between family loyalty and moral justice, between protecting the Al-Rashid name and honoring the truth that might destroy everything he had ever believed about himself. He picked up the flash drive with trembling fingers, knowing that once he looked at its contents, there would be no going back to the comfortable certainties of yesterday. The weight of it seemed to contain the entirety of his family's sins, waiting to be revealed. Khalil's hands shook as he inserted the flash drive into his laptop. The first file that opened was a photograph from 1995. Two young men in hard hats standing proudly beside an oil derrick in the Chad Desert. One was unmistakably his uncle Rashad, 20 years younger but with the same calculating eyes. The other man had kind features and an honest smile that reminded Khalil painfully of Amira. Omar Hassan looked like someone who had never imagined betrayal could come from friendship. The email correspondence began in 1998, innocuous business communications between partners. Gradually, the tone shifted. Rashad's messages to outside parties revealed a growing resentment toward Omar's leadership role and international recognition. Hassan gets all the credit while I do the real work, read one email to a competitor. Perhaps it's time for a change in leadership structure. By 2005, the emails became damning. Detailed plans to manipulate Hassan Group's contracts, strategies to turn investors against Omar, instructions for spreading rumors about his mental stability. The most devastating document was a recorded phone conversation from 2007, Rashad's voice clearly audible as he coordinated with corrupt officials to delay environmental permits that Hassan Group desperately needed. Omar trusts me completely, Rashad's voice echoed from Khalil's laptop speakers. He still thinks I'm protecting him. By the time he realizes what's happening, it'll be too late to save the company. Khalil slammed the laptop closed, nausea overwhelming him. His uncle hadn't just betrayed a business partner, he had systematically destroyed a friend while wearing the mask of loyalty. Every family gathering where Rashad had spoken warmly about poor Omar's unfortunate struggles had been theater, performed for an audience that included Omar's widow and daughter. His phone rang. Rashad's name appeared on the screen like an accusation. Khalil answered, his voice hollow. Khalil, I've been trying to reach you all morning. Have you handled the Hassan girl situation yet? Uncle, Khalil said slowly. I need to ask you something directly. What really happened with Omar Hassan? A pause that lasted too long. I told you yesterday, he was a poor businessman who failed. Why are you dwelling on ancient history? Because I've seen evidence that suggests otherwise. The silence stretched until Khalil wondered if the call had dropped. When Rashad spoke again, his voice carried a coldness Khalil had never heard before. Evidence can be fabricated, nephew. Desperate people say desperate things. Are you really going to trust the word of some girl over your own family? I'm looking at photographs, uncle. Financial records, recorded conversations. Then you're looking at very sophisticated lies. Rashad's tone became urgent. Khalil, you don't understand what's at stake here. The Hassan girl isn't just seeking justice, she's seeking revenge. You give her any credibility, she'll destroy everything we've built. Maybe everything we've built deserves to be destroyed. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Khalil could hear his uncle's sharp intake of breath. You ungrateful child, Rashad hissed. Everything you have, everything you are, exists because I made difficult decisions that your father was too weak to make. Omar Hassan was holding us back, limiting our growth with his naive ethics and conservative strategies. I liberated us from those constraints. You murdered him. I freed him from failure, Rashad shouted, his carefully maintained facade finally cracking. He was going to destroy everything with his idealistic nonsense about fair wages and environmental protection. I saved our business, our family's future. Khalil felt the world tilt around him. Uncle, what have you done? What needed to be done? Rashad's voice became ice cold again. And now you need to do what needs to be done. The Hassan girl has made herself a threat to everything we've accomplished. Handle it, Khalil, or I will. The line went dead. Khalil stared at his phone, realizing that his uncle had just issued what sounded like a threat against Amira's life. The man who had helped raise him, who had taught him about business and honor, was capable of murder to protect his secrets. He called Marcus Thompson immediately. Marcus, I need protection detail for Amira Hassan. Full surveillance, bodyguards, everything. Sir, is there a specific threat? My uncle, Khalil said quietly. Watch out for my uncle. That afternoon, Khalil called an emergency meeting with his London lawyers. The conference room at Clifford & Associates looked like a war council, as 3 senior partners reviewed the evidence Amira had provided. This is explosive, senior partner James Whitmore said grimly. If authenticated, these documents prove systematic fraud, conspiracy, and possibly criminal conspiracy. The international business community would be shocked to see Al-Rashid Industries implicated. Can the evidence be authenticated? Khalil asked. We'll need forensic accountants and digital experts, but preliminary examination suggests these documents are genuine. The question is, what do you want to do about it? Khalil stood and walked to the windows overlooking the Thames. What are my options? Legally, you could claim ignorance of your uncle's actions and cooperate with authorities to minimize damage to your reputation. Ethically? Whitmore paused. That's a decision only you can make. What would cooperation involve? Full disclosure of evidence, testimony against your uncle if charges are filed, restitution to the Hassan family, public acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Whitmore's voice was careful. It would destroy Rashad Al-Rashid completely. Khalil thought about family dinners where his uncle had told stories about building their empire, about the pride in his voice when discussing their success. Every memory was now contaminated by the knowledge of what Rashad had done to achieve that success. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Your uncle's people have been asking questions about my location. I'm disappearing again. The evidence speaks for itself now. Choose wisely. A.H. Khalil's blood ran cold. Amira was in danger because he hadn't acted quickly enough. His uncle's threats weren't empty posturing. They were operational plans. James, he said firmly, prepare full cooperation documents. I want to contact the authorities immediately, and I need you to help me reach Amira Hassan before something terrible happens to her. As his lawyers scrambled to action, Khalil realized he had crossed a line that would change everything. In choosing justice over family loyalty, he was choosing to become someone his uncle would see as an enemy. The war Amira had started with her public humiliation was about to escalate into something that could destroy everything he had ever known. But for the first time since seeing Omar Hassan's honest smile in that photograph, Khalil felt like he might be choosing to become someone worthy of respect. The question was whether he could save Amira Hassan's life long enough to prove it. The safe house in Belgravia looked unremarkable from the outside, just another elegant townhouse in one of London's most exclusive neighborhoods. Inside, however, Marcus Thompson's security team had transformed it into a fortress. Amira Hassan sat in the drawing room, her laptop open, surrounded by documents and evidence that represented 8 years of meticulous investigation. "Your uncle moved quickly," Marcus reported to Khalil as they stood in the entrance hallway. "We intercepted 3 separate surveillance teams trying to locate Miss Hassan. Professional contractors, not amateurs. He's taking this very seriously." Khalil nodded grimly. Since yesterday's phone call, Rashad had stopped trying to reach him directly, which somehow felt more ominous than the angry threats. "Is she safe here?" "For now. But Mr. Al-Rashid, you need to understand, your uncle has significant resources and 40 years of international connections. If he's truly committed to silencing Miss Hassan, this becomes a very dangerous game." Through the doorway, Khalil could see Amira working with intense focus, occasionally speaking into her phone in what sounded like Arabic and French. She had changed into practical clothes, jeans and a sweater, but somehow managed to look both vulnerable and formidable simultaneously. "Miss Hassan," Khalil said as he entered the room, "I owe you an apology." She looked up, her dark eyes studying his face carefully. "For the conference humiliation or for your uncle's current attempts to have me killed?" "Both. All of it." Khalil sat across from her, struck again by her composure under pressure. "I've seen the evidence. Everything you said about my uncle is true." "I know it's true," she replied simply. "The question is, what are you prepared to do about it?" Khalil leaned forward. "I'm prepared to expose everything. Cooperate with authorities, provide testimony, make full restitution to your family. But I need to know, is this about justice or revenge?" Amira was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns on the table surface. "When I was 13, my mother and I lived in a refugee camp outside Calais. Brilliant PhD candidate reduced to washing dishes in camp kitchens. You know what that does to a woman's spirit? I can't imagine. She never complained, never blamed my father for the choices that led us there. But sometimes, late at night, I heard her crying, grieving not just for my father, but for the life we should have had." Amira's voice remained steady, but Khalil could see the pain beneath. "So yes, Mr. Al-Rashid, this is about revenge, but it's also about justice. And sometimes those are the same thing." Before Khalil could respond, Marcus Thompson appeared in the doorway, his expression urgent. "Sir, we have a problem. Your uncle has just landed at Heathrow with a private security team. Intelligence suggests he's not planning to leave London without resolving this situation." Khalil felt ice in his veins. "How long do we have?" "Hours, maybe less. He's checking into the Dorchester under diplomatic immunity. Apparently, the UAE embassy is providing cover." Marcus paused meaningfully. "Sir, he's not coming to negotiate." Amira closed her laptop with decisive finality. "Then we accelerate our timeline." She turned to Khalil. "I was planning to give you 24 hours to decide. We now have 2 hours before I release everything to international media simultaneously." 2 hours. Khalil's mind raced through implications. "That's not enough time to—" "It's enough time for you to choose," Amira interrupted. "Stand with truth and justice, or stand with family loyalty and corruption. But choose quickly, because your uncle's presence changes everything." Khalil's phone rang. James Whitmore's voice was tense. "Khalil, we have a situation. Someone has filed an emergency injunction claiming that privileged business documents have been stolen. They're requesting immediate seizure of all evidence related to Hassan Group." "On what grounds?" "Corporate espionage and theft of intellectual property. The filing claims Miss Hassan unlawfully obtained confidential materials through criminal means." Whitmore paused. "It's your uncle's signature on the legal documents." Khalil looked at Amira, who had clearly overheard the conversation. "He's trying to have the evidence declared inadmissible?" "More than that," she said grimly. "If the injunction is granted, possession of the documents becomes a criminal offense. I become a fugitive, and you become an accessory after the fact." The walls seemed to be closing in from all directions. Rashad was using legal warfare to criminalize the evidence, while simultaneously deploying physical threats to silence the accuser. It was a sophisticated operation that demonstrated decades of experience in destroying inconvenient obstacles. "How long until the injunction hearing?" Khalil asked his lawyer. 3 hours. Emergency session, but that gives us time to prepare counterarguments." Amira stood abruptly. No. No more waiting, no more legal maneuvering. She pulled out her phone. I'm calling the BBC, Al Jazeera, and Reuters simultaneously. This story goes public in the next 30 minutes, before your uncle can suppress it legally. Wait, Khalil said desperately. If you release everything now, it becomes trial by media. There's no control over the narrative, no way to ensure accuracy. There's also no way for your uncle to suppress the truth, she countered. Mr. Al-Rashid, in the last 48 hours you've seen who your family really is. Your uncle destroyed my father while pretending to love him. He's now trying to destroy me while claiming legal justification. How many more people will suffer while you worry about controlling narratives? The question hung in the air like a moral guillotine. Khalil realized that this moment would define not just his future, but his fundamental character. Was he someone who prioritized family loyalty over justice? Someone who valued reputation over truth? Someone who would let fear determine his choices? Outside, London's afternoon traffic hummed with oblivious normalcy. Inside this elegant safe house, 3 lives balanced on the edge of decisions that would reshape international business, destroy a family dynasty, and potentially cost them all everything they held dear. Khalil looked at Amira Hassan, brilliant, courageous, and absolutely determined to see justice done regardless of the cost. She represented everything his privilege had taught him to dismiss. Powerless, female, refugee, outsider. Yet she had accomplished something he never could. She had maintained her integrity despite losing everything. Make the calls, he said quietly. I'll stand with you whatever comes next. Amira's smile transformed her entire face, and for the first time since this began, Khalil felt like he might be becoming worthy of such respect. But as she reached for her phone, alarms began sounding throughout the safe house. Marcus Thompson's voice crackled through the intercom. Hostile approach, multiple vehicles, professional formation. This is not a drill. The sounds of screeching tires and slamming car doors echoed through the Belgravia street as Marcus Thompson's team moved with military precision. 6 vehicles, approximately 20 personnel, he reported through his earpiece while checking weapon systems. They're not trying to be subtle anymore. Khalil moved to the window, carefully peering through reinforced blinds. Black SUVs had positioned themselves at strategic points around the block, their occupants wearing expensive suits that poorly concealed tactical equipment. At the center of the formation stood Uncle Rashad, his silver hair immaculate despite the circumstances, speaking calmly into a satellite phone while gesturing toward the safe house. He's treating this like a business transaction, Khalil muttered, recognizing his uncle's casual confidence. Just another problem to be resolved efficiently. Amira continued working frantically on her laptop, uploading files to secure servers while simultaneously video calling international news outlets. BBC is standing by for live interview, she announced without looking up. Al Jazeera wants exclusive Middle Eastern rights. Reuters is preparing simultaneous worldwide release. Miss Hassan, Marcus interrupted urgently. We need to evacuate. My team can hold them off, but not indefinitely. These men are professionals. 2 more minutes, Amira replied, her fingers flying across the keyboard. I need to ensure the evidence reaches multiple secure locations before they can suppress it digitally. Through the window, Khalil watched his uncle approach the front door, with the calm demeanor of someone making a social call. The contrast between Rashad's civilized appearance and the armed men flanking him was somehow more terrifying than overt aggression would have been. The doorbell rang with polite insistence. Don't answer it, Marcus advised, but Khalil was already moving toward the entrance. Something in his uncle's bearing suggested that hiding would only delay the inevitable confrontation. Khalil, Rashad's voice carried clearly through the reinforced door. We need to discuss this situation like family. Open the door, nephew. There's no need for this theatrical nonsense. Against Marcus's urgent protests, Khalil activated the intercom system. Uncle, you've brought an army to a conversation. That doesn't suggest family discussion. Rashad's laugh was genuinely amused. Security precautions, nothing more. The Hassan girl has made some dangerous allegations that require careful handling. I'm here to protect all of us from unnecessary scandal. By silencing her permanently, by offering her a better alternative than martyrdom. Rashad's voice remained patient, almost fatherly. Khalil, invite me inside. Let's resolve this properly, the way your father would have wanted. The mention of his father hit Khalil like a physical blow. Throughout this crisis, he had wondered what his father would have done, whether the man he remembered as honorable would have chosen justice over family loyalty. Sir, Marcus warned quietly, this is textbook negotiation tactics. He's trying to isolate you from support systems. But Khalil was already unlocking the door. Some conversations required facing the monster directly, regardless of the risks involved. Khalil Al-Rashid entered alone, leaving his security team positioned outside. At 65, he remained imposing, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that commanded boardrooms and intimidated opponents. His expensive cologne couldn't quite mask something else, something that smelled like fear and desperation. "Amira," he said warmly, as if greeting a beloved niece, "you've grown into a remarkable young woman. Your father would be proud of your intelligence and determination." Amira's hands stilled on her keyboard. She turned slowly, her expression carefully neutral. "Uncle Rashad," she replied, using the childhood title with devastating irony. "Still pretending to care about my father's pride. I never stopped caring about Omar," Rashad said, his voice carrying what sounded like genuine sadness. "His death was a tragedy that haunts me daily. His murder," Amira corrected coldly, "was your deliberate choice." Rashad sighed deeply, settling into a chair without invitation. "Omar was destroying everything we built together. His naive idealism would have bankrupted both our companies and cost thousands of jobs. I made difficult decisions to save what could be saved. You made criminal decisions to steal what you couldn't earn," Khalil said, surprised by the strength in his own voice. His uncle studied him with disappointment that felt more devastating than anger. "Khalil, you sound like your father. All moral principles and no practical wisdom. Do you think business empires are built through kindness and ethical purity? Do you believe we maintain our family's position through weakness? I believe we maintain our honor through truth," Khalil replied, though his voice wavered slightly. Rashad laughed, the sound harsh and bitter. "Honor? Your father died believing in honor while I built everything that made you wealthy. Your education, your lifestyle, your business opportunities, all funded by decisions you're now condemning as immoral." The words struck home because they contained uncomfortable truth. Khalil's privilege had indeed been built on his uncle's ruthless pragmatism. Every luxury he had enjoyed carried the stain of Omar Hassan's destruction. "That doesn't justify murder," Amira said quietly, her fingers moving back to her keyboard. "And it doesn't justify the threats against my life." "Nobody wants to hurt you, child," Rashad said, his tone becoming almost grandfatherly. "But you're forcing impossible choices. If you destroy our family's reputation, what happens to the thousands of people who depend on Al-Rashid Industries for employment? What happens to the charitable foundations we fund? What happens to the economic stability we provide across 3 continents? It was masterful manipulation, Khalil realized. Rashad was positioning himself as protector of the greater good, making Amira's quest for justice seem selfish and destructive. What happens to the truth? Amira countered. What happens to other families who might be destroyed if your methods continue unchallenged? The truth, Rashad said sadly, is a luxury that powerful families cannot always afford. Khalil felt something shift inside him as he listened to his uncle's casual dismissal of moral absolutes. This was the man who had shaped his understanding of success, who had taught him that results mattered more than methods. This was also the man who had systematically destroyed a friend while attending his funeral and comforting his widow. "Uncle," Khalil said slowly, "I've made my choice. I'm standing with justice, regardless of the cost." Rashad's expression hardened, revealing the calculating predator beneath the civilized facade. "Then you're choosing to destroy everything your father built for the sake of a dead man's revenge." "I'm choosing to become someone my father would respect," Khalil replied, surprised by his own certainty. "Your father was weak," Rashad snapped, his patience finally exhausted. "His weakness would have destroyed us all if I hadn't been strong enough to make necessary decisions." The admission hung in the air like poison gas. Rashad had just revealed that his betrayal of Omar Hassan was part of a larger pattern, possibly including decisions that had affected Khalil's own father. "What did you do to my father?" Khalil asked, ice forming in his stomach. Rashad realized his mistake immediately, but it was too late to retract. "Your father died of a heart attack, nothing more." "What did you do?" Khalil repeated, his voice rising. Amira looked up sharply from her laptop, sensing the shift in emotional dynamics. Marcus Thompson moved closer, his hand instinctively moving toward his concealed weapon. Your father discovered some irregularities in our partnership agreements, Rashad said carefully. He was planning to audit our joint operations, possibly restructure our entire relationship. The stress of those decisions contributed to his cardiac episode. You killed him too, Khalil whispered, the words barely audible. I protected our interests when he proved incapable of necessary leadership, Rashad corrected coldly. Everything I did preserved what you now enjoy. The room seemed to spin around Khalil as decades of family mythology crumbled into dust. His father hadn't died from random heart failure. He had been murdered by the man trusted to protect the family legacy. Done, Amira announced suddenly, her voice cutting through Khalil's emotional devastation. Evidence uploaded to servers in 12 countries. Interview requests confirmed with major international outlets. The story goes live in 30 minutes whether we're alive to see it or not. Rashad's composure finally cracked completely. You foolish child. You have no idea what forces you're unleashing. This evidence will destroy more than just our family. It will destabilize entire regional economies. Then maybe those economies need destabilizing, Amira replied calmly. Outside, the sound of additional vehicles arriving suggested that Rashad's security team was being reinforced. The genteel negotiations were about to become something far more dangerous. Last chance, Rashad said, standing slowly. Retract the evidence, disappear quietly, and live comfortable lives in exile, or face the consequences of declaring war against people who have spent 40 years learning how to win such wars. Khalil looked at Amira, seeing his father's courage reflected in her determined expression. For the first time in his life, he understood what true strength looked like, not the power to destroy others, but the courage to accept destruction rather than compromise essential principles. We choose consequences, he said firmly. Rashad nodded sadly, as if Khalil had confirmed a disappointing but expected outcome. Then you've chosen death, both of you. As his uncle moved toward the door, Marcus Thompson stepped forward. Sir, I should mention, Miss Hassan's evidence includes detailed documentation of this conversation, video and audio, transmitted live to secure servers. Threatening witnesses has just become part of the permanent record. Rashad paused, his hand on the doorknob, realizing that his final threat had been captured and broadcast. The predator had been trapped by his own hubris. Checkmate, Amira said quietly, and for the first time since this began, she smiled with genuine triumph. The BBC News at 6 led with the story that would reshape international business forever. Explosive evidence reveals decades of systematic fraud and murder within one of the Middle East's most powerful business dynasties, announced anchor Hugh Edwards, as images of Khalil and Khalil Al-Rashid filled screens across the globe. In the safe house, Khalil watched his family's destruction broadcast to millions of viewers, while Amira conducted simultaneous interviews with news outlets across 6 time zones. Her transformation from waitress to international whistleblower was complete, her articulate explanations of complex financial crimes riveting audiences worldwide. Mr. Al-Rashid, came a question from CNN International. What convinced you to expose your own uncle's crimes? Khalil looked directly into the camera, thinking of his father's photograph on his desk, of Omar Hassan's honest smile, of the thousands of people whose lives had been affected by his family's choices. Sometimes choosing family means choosing truth over loyalty. Sometimes honor requires admitting that everything you believed was built on lies. Outside, police sirens wailed as metropolitan police units surrounded the building. Rashad's security team had withdrawn immediately after the evidence went public, leaving him isolated and exposed. Through the window, Khalil could see his uncle sitting alone in one of the black SUVs, speaking urgently into multiple phones as his empire collapsed in real time. The financial markets are reacting strongly, reported Bloomberg's London correspondent. Al-Rashid Industries shares have fallen 60% since the story broke 2 hours ago. Trading has been suspended pending investigation by international regulatory authorities. Khalil's phone buzzed constantly with calls from board members, business partners, and family members across the Gulf. He ignored them all, focused instead on Amira's methodical destruction of his uncle's carefully constructed facade. The evidence suggests that Khalil Al-Rashid not only orchestrated Omar Hassan's business destruction, but may have been responsible for multiple suspicious deaths over the past 2 decades. Amira explained to Al Jazeera's investigative team. We're talking about a pattern of systematic elimination of anyone who threatened his control. Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell of the Metropolitan Police arrived as the interviews concluded. Mr. Al-Rashid, Miss Hassan, we need to discuss protective custody arrangements. The threats against your lives are being taken very seriously by international law enforcement. What about my uncle? Khalil asked. Rashad Al-Rashid is currently under diplomatic protection at the UAE embassy, but Interpol has issued preliminary alerts. His ability to travel freely has been severely compromised. D.I. Mitchell consulted her notes. However, his resources remain substantial. We recommend maintaining security protocols indefinitely. As evening fell over London, Khalil found himself sitting beside Amira in the safe house kitchen, sharing takeaway Indian food while watching their story dominate global news coverage. The surreal normalcy of eating curry while international manhunts were organized felt like something from a different person's life. Any regrets? Amira asked, her voice softer than he had heard it before. Khalil considered the question seriously. His family's reputation was destroyed. His business empire was crumbling. His uncle wanted him dead. His future was uncertain in ways that terrified him. None, he said, surprising himself with the honesty. For the first time in my life, I feel like I've done something worthy of respect. Your father would be proud, she said simply. How can you know that? You never met him. Amira smiled, pulling out her phone to show him a photograph he had never seen before. Two young men in business suits standing beside a newly constructed school in rural Chad. One was his father, looking barely older than Khalil was now. The other was Omar Hassan. My father kept this picture on his desk until the day he died, she explained. He used to tell me stories about your father's generosity, his insistence on building schools and hospitals in every community where they operated. He said Ahmed Al-Rashid understood that wealth was meaningless unless it served a larger purpose. Khalil stared at the photograph, seeing his father's idealism written in his young face. What happened to that vision? Your uncle convinced him that idealism was impractical, that survival required harder choices. Amira touched the photograph gently, but your father never stopped believing in the original vision. According to my father, Ahmed was planning to restructure the entire company around charitable foundations before he died. A heart attack that wasn't a heart attack, Khalil said grimly. Rashad couldn't allow your father's conscience to destroy what he had built through cruelty, she agreed. So he eliminated the obstacle, just like he eliminated mine. They sat in comfortable silence, watching BBC coverage of international investigations being launched. Prosecutors in 6 countries were reviewing evidence. Financial regulators were freezing accounts. Human rights organizations were calling for justice. What happens now? Khalil asked. Now we rebuild, Amira replied with quiet determination. Your father's vision doesn't have to die with him. Al-Rashid Industries can become what it was always meant to be, a force for positive change rather than exploitation. The board will never accept that direction. The shareholders would revolt. Then we build something new. Amira's eyes lit up with possibility. Use whatever wealth survives the investigations to create the foundations your father envisioned. Hire the engineers your uncle fired for having consciences. Build the schools and hospitals that should have been built years ago. It was ambitious to the point of fantasy, but something in her vision resonated with dreams Khalil had abandoned long ago. It would take years to rebuild trust, decades to prove that real change was possible. Most worthwhile things do, she agreed. The question is whether you're willing to spend your life earning redemption rather than simply enjoying privilege. Before Khalil could answer, D.I. Mitchell appeared in the doorway. I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have developments. Rashad Al-Rashid has fled the embassy. Private jet departed Heathrow 30 minutes ago. Destination unknown. He's officially a fugitive from international justice. The news should have brought relief, but Khalil felt only sadness. His uncle's flight confirmed everything. The guilt, the desperation, the complete moral bankruptcy. The man who had helped raise him was now running from consequences he had spent decades avoiding. Will they catch him? Amira asked. Eventually, D.I. Mitchell replied. Men like Rashad Al-Rashid leave trails wherever they go. Money, connections, resources, they all create vulnerabilities. May take time, but justice will find him. As the detective left, Khalil's phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. Against better judgment, he answered. Khalil. His uncle's voice was tired, older than he had ever heard it. I want you to know that everything I did was to protect our family's future. Where are you, Uncle? Somewhere safe for now, but I need you to understand. The path you've chosen will destroy everything. Not just me, not just our reputation, but thousands of innocent people who depend on our business for survival. Khalil looked at Amira, seeing strength in her expression that gave him courage. Then we'll find ways to help those people that don't require building on murder and theft. You're naive, just like your father. That naivety will cost you everything. Maybe, Khalil agreed, but at least I'll be able to sleep at night. The line went dead. Khalil realized it was probably the last conversation he would ever have with the man who had shaped his childhood, who had taught him about business and power, who had also systematically destroyed everyone who threatened his control. No more looking back, Amira said gently, as if reading his thoughts. Only forward, toward what we can build together. Together. The word carried possibilities that Khalil was only beginning to understand. Not romantic partnership necessarily, but something deeper. Shared purpose, mutual respect, common commitment to justice. They were bound now by choices that had cost them everything and given them something invaluable in return, the chance to create meaning from destruction. Outside, London glittered with lights that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless empires. Inside the safe house, two people who had started as enemies began planning how to transform inherited guilt into inherited responsibility, how to build something worthy of the sacrifices that had brought them together. The real work was just beginning. 6 months later, the Khalil Al-Rashid Foundation occupied a modest building in London's Canary Wharf, a deliberate contrast to the opulent headquarters that had once housed Al-Rashid Industries. Through floor-to-ceiling windows, Khalil could see the Thames flowing toward the sea, carrying away the remnants of his former life while bringing possibilities he had never imagined. The Chad project is ahead of schedule, Amira reported from her desk across the room, which had once belonged to his uncle's secretary. The first school will open next month, and the hospital construction begins in September. Khalil nodded, reviewing financial reports that told a story of transformation rather than exploitation. The foundation's resources came from liquidated Al-Rashid assets, seized properties, and recovered funds that investigators had traced through dozens of offshore accounts. Every dollar represented a choice to build rather than destroy, to heal rather than harm. Any word from the prosecution team? He asked. Rashad's trial in absentia begins next week in The Hague. International Criminal Court is handling the human rights violations, while financial crimes are being prosecuted separately in London, Dubai, and Chad. Amira's voice carried satisfaction without vindictiveness. Justice moves slowly, but it moves. Their partnership had evolved naturally over the months of building something meaningful from the wreckage of their family's legacy. Khalil brought business expertise and international connections. Amira contributed academic brilliance and an uncompromising moral compass. Together, they were creating what their fathers had originally envisioned, a force for positive change in communities that had suffered from decades of exploitation. Mr. Al-Rashid, their receptionist's voice came through the intercom. There's a young woman here who says she needs to speak with you urgently. She won't give her name, but she says it's about your uncle. Khalil and Amira exchanged glances. Since Rashad's disappearance, they had received occasional contact from his various victims, business partners he had betrayed, families he had destroyed, communities he had exploited. Each story added weight to their mission while confirming the necessity of their choices. "Send her in," Khalil said. The woman who entered was perhaps 25, with nervous eyes and expensive clothes that couldn't quite hide her obvious distress. She clutched a leather portfolio like a lifeline. "Mr. Al-Rashid, Miss Hassan," she began in accented English. "My name is Layla Al-Mansouri. I was Rashad Al-Rashid's personal assistant for 3 years." Khalil felt his chest tighten. He's dead, she said simply. "Heart attack, 3 days ago in a hospital in Monaco. But before he died, he gave me this." She held up the portfolio. "He said it was for you, that you would know what to do with it." The silence stretched as they processed this information. Rashad Al-Rashid, murderer, betrayer, destroyer of families, was dead. Khalil waited for relief, satisfaction, some emotion that would mark the end of this chapter. Instead, he felt only sadness for the waste of a brilliant mind that had chosen cruelty over compassion. "What's in the portfolio?" Amira asked gently. Layla opened it with trembling hands, revealing documents that made both Khalil and Amira gasp audibly. Bank account numbers, property deeds, trust fund documentation, evidence of hidden assets worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He said, Layla continued, her voice barely above a whisper, that he spent his final weeks liquidating everything he could access. All of it is here. Money stolen from victims over 40 years of criminal activity. He said it belonged to the people he had destroyed, and that you would ensure it reached them. Khalil stared at the documents, hardly able to process their implications. His uncle, facing death and final judgment, had chosen restitution over defiance. Perhaps in his final moments, Rashid Al-Rashid had remembered the man he had been before ambition corrupted his soul. There's more, Layla added, pulling out a sealed envelope with Khalil's name written in his uncle's distinctive handwriting. He asked me to give this to you personally. Khalil opened the letter with hands that shook slightly. Khalil, by the time you read this, I will be dead, facing whatever judgment awaits men who choose power over principle. I have spent these final months reviewing my choices, and I find them wanting in every measure that matters. Your father was right. Omar Hassan was right. You and the Hassan girl are right. There are some things more valuable than wealth, more important than power, more lasting than empire. The attached assets represent my attempt at restitution, though no amount of money can restore the lives I destroyed or heal the families I shattered. Use these resources to build what your father envisioned, a legacy of healing rather than harm. I killed your father because his conscience threatened everything I had built through cruelty. I killed Omar Hassan because his integrity exposed my corruption. I spent 40 years destroying anyone who reminded me of what I could have been. Do not waste your life as I wasted mine. Love honestly, choose courageously, build justly. Be the men your fathers were meant to be. With regret and hope for your redemption, Rashid Khalil read the letter twice before handing it to Amira, who absorbed its contents with growing amazement. Around them, London's financial district hummed with the same relentless ambition that had once driven them both. But the letter transformed everything they thought they understood about guilt, forgiveness, and the possibility of redemption. He chose to do the right thing in the end, Amira said softly. Does that matter? Khalil asked. After everything he destroyed, everyone he killed? It matters to the families who will benefit from this restitution. It matters to the communities we can now help rebuild. It matters because it proves that even the worst among us can choose justice over self-preservation. Layla Al-Mansouri stood quietly, witnessing this moment of moral reckoning with obvious relief. He wasn't a good man, she said finally, but he suffered greatly in his final weeks. The weight of his choices destroyed him long before his heart failed. Over the following days, the Foundation's lawyers worked to verify and process Rashid's final restitution. The hidden assets totaled nearly $600 million, enough to fund educational programs, medical facilities, and economic development projects across 3 continents. Every dollar would go to communities that had suffered from Al-Rashid exploitation, transforming decades of theft into generations of opportunity. Your father's school in Chad is being renamed, Amira announced during their weekly planning meeting. The Ahmed Al-Rashid Institute for Ethical Leadership. The first graduation ceremony is scheduled for next spring. Khalil smiled, imagining his father's pride at seeing his vision finally realized. Will you come with me to the ceremony? Try to keep me away, she replied, returning his smile with warmth that had grown steadily over their months of partnership. As autumn settled over London, Khalil often found himself thinking about the journey that had brought him from arrogant privilege to purposeful responsibility. The conference where Amira had publicly humiliated him seemed like another lifetime, though only 18 months had passed. That moment of devastating recognition had catalyzed changes he never could have imagined. The destruction of his family's empire, the exposure of decades of crimes, the death of his uncle, and his own transformation from entitled heir to committed activist. Any regrets? Amira asked one evening as they reviewed applications for foundation grants, the question she had posed 6 months earlier. Khalil considered seriously before answering. I regret the wasted years when I could have been building instead of consuming. I regret not questioning my uncle's methods sooner. I regret that my father and yours never lived to see their vision fulfilled. He paused. But I don't regret the path that brought us here, even though it cost you everything you thought you wanted. Everything I thought I wanted was built on lies, he replied. What we're building now is based on truth. That's worth any sacrifice. Through their windows, London's lights twinkled like stars, each one representing lives and dreams and possibilities. Somewhere in that vast cityscape, Families were planning futures made possible by foundation programs. Students were studying in schools built with recovered assets. Patients were receiving care in clinics funded by restitution money. The Khalil Al-Rashid Foundation would never make headlines the way Al-Rashid Industries once had. Their work was quiet, methodical, focused on sustainable change rather than dramatic gestures. But every life improved, every opportunity created, every injustice addressed, added meaning to the sacrifices that had made their mission possible. "What would you tell your father if you could see him again?" Khalil asked Amira as they prepared to leave for the evening. She smiled, touching the photograph of Amira Hassan that held a place of honor on her desk. That his daughter kept her promise. That justice was served. That his vision lives on in everything we do. She paused thoughtfully. "What would you tell yours?" Khalil looked at the matching photograph of Amira Al-Rashid, young and idealistic, standing beside the school in Chad where their father's friendship had begun. "That I finally understand what he tried to teach me. That wealth without wisdom is worthless. Power without principle is poison. Success without service is ultimately meaningless." As they walked through London's evening bustle toward the tube station, Khalil realized that he had found something more valuable than all the riches his uncle had accumulated through decades of cruelty. He had found purpose, partnership, and the profound satisfaction of building rather than destroying. The story that had begun with a waitress correcting a billionaire's arrogance had evolved into something far more significant. A testament to the power of truth over lies, justice over convenience, and love over fear. Their father's legacy lived on, not in corporate empires or financial statements, but in the lives they touched and the changes they created. Behind them, London glittered with infinite possibilities. Ahead lay the continuing work of transformation, slow, difficult, but absolutely essential. Together they walked toward a future worthy of the sacrifices that had brought them to this moment of grace.